All right, hi folks. Week 2 of Read 437. We're focusing this week on administering and analyzing this motivation assessment you read about last week. This is our sort of our intro assessment and a way to sort of ground us in the course content and methods. So by now you or have or will made plans to administer the motivation assessment to your classroom. Several of you, by the time you hear this, probably actually already have. So you should have somewhere between roughly 6 and 20 to 30 student responses to this assessment. So we're going to focus today on what to do about that because the report is due next Friday, and I want to get you ready and into that process because analyzing data is as key to this class as just merely giving the assessment as well. So I want to talk a little bit about the assessment construct and then talk a bit about what you'll be doing with it. So the motivation survey, as you read in the Malloy piece last week, and you must have noticed, is kind of like a really simple construct. There's two types of questions, and you probably noticed this is one of those surveys, if you remember taking them yourself, whether in college or in high school, that the survey basically asks the same 3 or 4 questions in different ways over and over again. And that's by design, of course. And so there were even numbered items that were just simply about whether students valued reading or not and what aspects of it. And then there were other ones about themselves as readers. How did they perceive themselves? So there were questions about how they, compared to their friends, for instance, or other peers in the classroom. And some of you had concerns about that, and I share those concerns about asking that type of questions. But for the sake of the exercise, I do want you to ask it as well, and it's there for that purpose as well. So you're going to deliver this assessment, and while there are some challenges or concerns about the assessment, the point of one of these assessments is to basically make it short enough that you could give it to students, but also then ask essentially the same question over and over again so that you can create a validated survey item. That is, you can wean out and sort of regress all the numbers back to what we would call a mean so that a kid could answer irregularly on a couple of items, but still actually get a score that's near enough to the true beliefs and attitudes that you might actually be able to use the data. That's why the survey is 20 items. That's why the items are so similar. It's really to sort of balance everything out so you get an accurate score. So in 279 of the Malloy piece, you'll note that there's this scoring template. That's why I need you to keep this at 20 items and need to keep the items this way because you're going to score it exactly like that. This is the point of the exercise, really, just to sort of follow along with an assessment. So you can see that they've kind of alternated the items. Most of them are probably, they go from highest to lowest, but some are also from lowest to highest as well. And so you can see, so for each item, they name what type of item it is, self-concept versus value of reading, as well as the number total for each score. So the first thing you're going to want to do is once you get the answers back from students is you're going to want to actually record them based on score point. So for each student, you're going to list what they scored on an item based on that those scoring guidelines, and for all 20 items. So I made an example scoring sheet. There's one on, I believe, 280 or 281 of the Malloy piece as well. But you can see here for my example students, in the last items, I listed what they scored based on their answer for 19 and 20, and then I added up 3 things. One is I added up all of the questions for the value, and I added up all the questions for self-concept as well. So there's 10 items at a maximum of 4 points each. You're talking about a 40 total score, and then 80 in total when you add the two of them together. So what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to create a spreadsheet. You're going to turn this into me. A spreadsheet, Microsoft Word document, whatever works best for you. I don't care about the format so much as that you, or the medium so much as that you follow just this template of listing your students and then their scores on the items. And then, so add this up, and then the piece recommends, and I would as well, just because it will make analysis easier, to just find a way to highlight scores that are at the particularly at the bottom end. And you may want to also, if it's valuable to you, if students score highly on certain items, to mark those as well. But you can see here that student C scored a 1 and 19, and I simply highlighted it as something I may want to note that's significant as well. So you're going to do this for all your students, lay this out, add up the totals, because then you're going to use these totals and these individual scoring items to then actually do an analysis of your students and the class as a whole. So on page 8 of the syllabus, and I would recommend pausing right now and getting this document out because it'll be useful to check with. On page 8 of the syllabus, we have a report format. You're going to follow this for pretty much every single assignment you do in this classroom. This is in part actually to make things easier for you, but also to help make sure you're focused. And so you can organize the report by these features. And you'll see at the top there's some basic background information in terms of students' grade level, etc., that I'll also want you to include in a Microsoft Word document. But I would recommend just copying and pasting this page of the syllabus into a Microsoft Word document and just using that as a template. So I'm going to need 5 things from you in your report, right? And the first one is just simply the administration conditions. You're going to tell me about giving the actual assessment. So all of you wrote to me over the weekend or on Monday and said, this is how I'm planning on administering the assessment. I want you to say as much. Just tell me a bit about when, where, how you did it. And then also if there's any details that are relevant, such as ways in which that might have affected the testing construct. So you might have several absent students, for instance, so there might be a noise, or you might have been interrupted, etc. These are things that are worth knowing because they might have actually informed or affected students' responses. In the second piece, you're going to notice that I'm going to ask you around the background of the students. I want you to give me whatever pertinent, relevant information about the students in relation to the assessment. And this is particularly true that if you're sampling a subset of your class and not the whole class. For instance, you're picking all the students who are reading at a certain level, you're picking all of the boys in the class, etc. I want you to give me, this is a good place to talk a bit about that group of students, what you know about them, and you can also talk a bit about your rationale for picking this group as well. So that just sort of front loads the assessment. In the findings section, you're going to tell me flat out what the data says. You're not going to interpret the data, you're not going to evaluate the data, you're not going to discuss what you're going to do with the data. You're simply going to tell me that. And this is a good place to do one of two things. You'll see Malloy talks about this as well. You could either describe the data, and that is, use words, sentences, paragraphs, etc. To describe the key features, or you could use tallies, right? So you might tally certain, like, you might look at the total average, you might look at which items students scored higher or lower on, etc. You're just objectively reporting what you found. And you might want to do a little bit of like the overall findings, and you might want to do a little bit around specific items as well. It's in the analysis section that you yourself are going to start to come back in. It's here you're going to talk a bit about the patterns, important patterns you're noticing, explanations, implications for the work, etc. And then finally, in the recommendation section, you're going to talk a bit about what it means for moving forward and what you might suggest or what you might plan to do. I'm neither asking you to do, like, fully cover everything, nor am I asking you to make generic recommendations. So you may want to focus in on one specific aspect. I know, obviously, it's one assessment, and there's many things that you're working on with students at a given time. So make the connection to what you think is most relevant when you make recommendations for moving forward with students. And you'll notice in the report format that I focus on an individual child, and that's just because in lots of cases in the class you are, but in this case we're focusing on multiple children. So just when I say to describe the performance level of a child, do that for children and the group as a whole. Just to sort of reiterate, the way I look at the section in which you're actually reporting on the data, there's really sort of 3 questions you're asking yourself. The findings section is asking yourself, what does it say? Think about literal comprehension in a reading class. Like, literally, what does the data say? The analysis is, what does it mean, right? So what's significant or important in the data, and how do you know? So in this case, you're linking evidence to some of the sort of the important themes or implications. And then finally, the recommendations is, what do you think should be done about it, right? So where do you see yourself focusing your efforts based on what you determined the meaning of the data was? I want to give you just a few possible directions for analysis. One is to think about the assessment as the motivation survey as a midterm snapshot. Where are your readers at currently, just in terms of their own engagement and value of the work, right? And then what does that tell you about moving forward from there? And you can think about how they've progressed or how they've been challenged over the course of the year. One of the things the Malloy piece talks about is this idea about reader self-conceptualization. How do readers see themselves? Particularly young people, how do they see themselves as literate people? And you might make that the focus of your analysis and your recommendations as well. And I would recommend going back to the Malloy piece and looking at that small subsection where she talks, she and the authors talk a bit about what that means to self-conceptualize. And you can then look at those items in particular. And then finally, some of you might find the results mixed or not useful enough. And so what I would recommend doing, this is optional, but I would certainly encourage you, is that you might want to actually use this as an opportunity to further investigate individual or groups of readers. And by that, the thing to do would be to actually give the conversational interview portion that's in the Malloy piece, as well as there's one in the picture and picture piece as well, if you're in grades 5 through 12. I've asked a couple of you to do this, but if I haven't asked you to do this, you're certainly welcome to as well. So this is a way to actually sort of enhance the depth of your data, and it also is an opportunity for you to target individual or groups of readers and learn more about them as well. So that's another approach. It's just an additional data step. And so you can use the protocol in Malloy, or you can use the protocol in Picture and Picture as an opportunity to follow up. You'll want to do a mix of asking about the students' responses to particular items, as well as also doing some sort of open-ended, get further insight into their work. Okay, so what's due this week? By Monday, February 22nd, you're going to have administered the motivation survey. You're going to do that this week. I want you to record the data in the spreadsheet or other form of your choosing. And I think do the findings section. And you just do bullet points. Just say, these are the things that I noticed. And then I also want you to outline plans for report. Again, bullet points are totally fine. Just go in and use that template and just say, these are the things I'm probably going to write about. Because again, the report is going to be due on Friday, February 26th. And the other thing I would suggest doing is I'm going to ask you to do partner work next week. Since the report is due on Friday, you'll want to achieve that and complete that before really the end of the day, Wednesday. Thursday is also possible if that's really pushing it. So I'm going to ask you to do some discussion about what you found in preparing the report. So make sure you touch base with your partner and schedule a time on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday of next week to either remotely and review one another's work, or to actually schedule some real-time conversation between the two of you.